Shabbat Shalom. Good to see everybody this morning.
Shabbat Shalom.
We are going to complete the last Torah portion that we were reading, which is Ki Tavo. So we have one more chapter, and then we're going to focus on Nitzavim, which is the next Torah portion. So I'm going to share my screen. Yay, that worked. I found a different place to get the, this is actually from Chabad, but the English is decent, and it doesn't have ads all over. So would anybody like to read?
Do it.
Okay.
Where are we on, actually?
I'm sorry, what?
What chapter and verse are we on?
Chapter
actually?
29, chapter 29 of Deuteronomy.
Yes, verse 1.
Uh-huh.
I'll read it.
Okay, Sandy, you'll read the next one.
Moses summoned all of Israel and said to them, "You have seen everything that Hashem did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, the great trials that your eyes beheld, those great signs and wonders. But Hashem did not give you a heart to know, or eyes to see, or ears to hear until this day. I led you for 40 years in the wilderness. Your garment did not wear out on you, and your shoe did not wear out from on your foot. Bread you did not eat, and wine or intoxicant you did not drink, so that you would know that I am Hashem your God. Then you arrived at this place, and Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, went out toward us to battle, and we smote them. We took their land and gave it as an inheritance to the Reubenite, the Gadite, and to half the tribe of the Manassite. You shall observe the words of this covenant so that you will succeed in all you do." You want me to go on?
Wait a minute, is that the end?
That's the end.
That's the end of Ki Tavo. Yes, thank you so much. Okay. Oops. So this is the beginning of Moses's third speech. This is sort of the introduction. So I'm going to just read you some commentary. Moses has presented all the terms of the second covenant to the people. Now, when was the first covenant?
Was with Abraham.
Well, that was a covenant with Abraham specifically, but what about with the people?
Well,
It's an easy one.
is that Mount Sinai?
Yeah, it's at Mount Sinai. That was, now they're adhering to it again, or at least hopefully they will. He's now going to summon them to ratify it.
Mm-hmm.
And he first reviews the experiences that serve as its basis, right? And, you've seen what I've done for you. God is saying, I've done all these amazing things for you. Then he reminds the people of the purpose of their assembly. Every man, woman, and child is to join the covenant, which we're going to read about in a moment. And it's binding on all future generations, as we will see. And he is going to warn people again about what the consequences are. In case you didn't get it when I told you what all the curses are going to be, let me remind you, you better listen, right? There's a midrash, and this is for Exodus, not for this part of it, because it says that the Israelites are standing under the mountain. In Hebrew, it says under, although, clearly it means at the foot of, not under the mountain. But of course, the rabbis go totally crazy when they, see something that's odd. And they say, oh, under the mountain, that must mean that God is holding the mountain over their heads. And if they accept the Torah, all will be well. And if not, God is going to drop the Torah on their heads.
The mountain or the Torah?
The mountain.
Oh.
Now, that's a disturbing midrash, because it sounds like, wow, that's kind of coercion, isn't it? They're not accepting it out of their own free will. Certainly right here where, God is basically saying you're free to accept or not accept it. But by the way, if you don't, watch out. Okay. So it's not that far off. And then another sort of way of understanding it, which is much easier to deal with, which is Emmanuel Levinas, a French philosopher, says that basically for the rabbis, the Torah makes the world, you know, a place that we can live in that has ethics and boundaries and all of that. But if we don't accept the Torah, what's going to happen is we're going to really go into chaos. We could see that right now, right? We can see
Right,
that right
right.
now. So if we don't adhere to certain principles of how to live decent lives, the world turns to chaos. So that's how he understands it, you know. And then there's another midrash, which is a lot nicer, which is that the mountain is the wedding canopy and the Torah is the ketubah, the marriage contract. So it was like a wedding between Israel and God. But certainly, you know, with all these curses being threatened, we are definitely talking about, you know, some sort of coercion. Again, if you look at it literally, that's definitely what's happening here. But if you look at it less literally and think, okay, here are the norms by which we need to live. And if we don't live by them, we see the consequences right now, right, in our own world. So that's kind of the introduction. Now we're going to go to Nitzavim, which is the next Torah portion, which is also one of the portions we read for Yom Kippur. So interesting that we read it then. We might want to think about that. And that's what my commentary is all about. So maybe Sandy can pick it up here. Let's see. All righty. So starting at verse 9.
You are all standing this day before the Lord, your God, the leaders of your tribes, your elders and your officers, every man of Israel, your young children, your women, and your convert who is within your camp, both your woodcutters and your water drawers, that you may enter the covenant of the Lord your God and his oath, which the Lord your God is making with you this day, in order to establish you this day as his people, and that he will be your God as he spoke to you, as he swore to your forefathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. But not only with you am I making this covenant and this oath, but with those standing here with us today before the Lord our God, and also with those who are not here with us this day. For you know how we dwelled in the land of Egypt, and how we passed along the nations through which you passed. And you saw their abominations and their repugnant idols of wood and stone, silver and gold which were with them. Perhaps there is among you a man, woman, or family, or tribe whose heart strays this day from the Lord our God, and go to worship the deities of those nations. Perhaps there is among you a root that produces hemlock and wormwood. You have somebody else.
Okay. Does somebody want to read a couple more verses?
I'll read.
What
18,
number?
starting at 18.
18?
Yeah.
And it will be when he hears the word of this oath that he will bless himself in his heart, saying, I will have peace, even if I follow my heart's desire, in order to add the punishment for the unintentional sins of this man to that of his intentional sins. The Lord will not be willing to forgive him. Rather, then the Lord's fury and his zeal will fume against that man, and the entire curse written in this book will rest upon him, and the Lord will obliterate his name from beneath the heavens.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to just go that far because there's a lot of stuff in here. What do people notice before we go to the commentary? Maybe I should put it back up so you can see it. Here.
I think it includes everybody, doesn't it, Rabbi?
Yes, it does.
Especially in that first verse, because it talks about the heads of your tribes, your elders, your officers, all the men of Israel, which is what I would expect. And then it goes on to say your small children, your women, your proselytes, your servants. So this is for everybody. This is an all-inclusive covenant.
Absolutely. Sandy, were you going to say something? Or
No, I was going to say exactly what she said.
okay, great. So it also says those who are standing here and those who are not standing here. Who are the people not standing here this day?
The future people.
Okay, who else?
The non-believers.
Yeah, the non-believers, you know, they may not have shown up for this particular covenant. It's also people who convert to Judaism. I love this piece here because it's basically saying it's not only future generations of Jews, like your children and your other descendants, but it's anyone who's not here today who actually, is at heart a Jew. So I think that's really beautiful. All right, so now I'm going to share my, wait a minute, my commentary. Where'd it go? Here it is. All right. Okay, you all, ugh. I'm trying to move this thing so that, oh, there we go. Okay. You all see that, right?
Mhm.
So is it big enough? Try to make it bigger.
Can you make it bigger?
You can also, I think you can make it bigger in view. I think it's where those dots are.
Uh-huh.
You can make it, I think it says view when you can make it bigger and
I have it in front of me also.
okay, let me just look at one other thing.
I printed mine.
Okay, wait a minute. I'm going to make it bigger. How's that?
You can also, as you go towards the top, you'll see your view options. It's a black box next to the green one that says
that's too big.
Rabbi.
Yeah, no, that's what I just said. That's what I just said, that if you go up there, it gives you different view options.
Right.
But I want to make it bigger. Oh, I see. Here, can I make that bigger here? Ugh. All right. It looks like it's only letting me do. I don't want to make it.
fine.
Oh, I see. Wait a minute. Here we go.
Looks fine.
Okay,
Oh.
that's good.
Oh, interesting.
There we go. How's that?
Great. Perfect.
Good.
Okay.
Okay. So Parshat Nitzavim describes a ceremony through which the people of Israel will enter into the covenant of Adonai, their God. It's a powerful ritual with its recited litany of curses for when the Israelites abandoned God and blessings for when they returned faithfully, but it's strangely redundant. The people of Israel already affirmed their commitment to God's covenant before the revelation at Mount Sinai. Why is Moses orchestrating a second entry into a covenantal relationship that already exists? I mean, that's a very logical question. We already said we shall hear and we shall do, and we sort of already accepted this covenant. So why are we going through this all again? Rashi, our 12th century French commentator, explains that this ceremony occurs on the day Moses dies and Joshua assumes leadership. Just as the people at the end of 40 years in the desert, not the desert, the desert. I copied this from a website, so are poised to attempt to conquer the land of Canaan. In this interpretation, Moses is creating an opportunity in this transitional moment for the people to pause, shore up their enthusiasm, and seriously recommit to taking the next difficult steps. I'm actually surprised that Rashi didn't say, hey, guess what happened to that generation that originally agreed to the covenant at Mount Sinai?
They died.
They died. So, so it is necessary for another recommitment or a commitment period. But for some reason, that's not what Rashi looks at. Some modern commentaries, however, hint that it was necessary to enter into the covenant again because the first experience was flawed in a critical way. Does anybody remember how it was flawed?
Don't go near a woman.
Thank you. That's exactly it. So when Moses issued his instruction for preparing to receive the Torah at Sinai, he said, be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman. Some feminist commentaries have suggested an interpretation of this verse, strongly rejected, of course, by classical commentaries, that implies that the covenant of Sinai was made only with men. And that is a very important moment for Jewish feminists, because don't go near a woman. It doesn't say to the women, don't go near a man. You know, you're not supposed to go near a woman because you're not supposed to have sex when you're about to have, you know, this amazing experience. Same thing when you go to war, but it doesn't do the same for the women. Of course, I think it's Rashi also who says that, you know, the women were definitely included because it says the covenant was made with Israel and with Jacob. And so one represents the women and one represents the men. But you can also see why that would not fly with some feminists. But whether or not this is correct, it is clear that the experience was far from participatory. We're told that the people were so overwhelmed that they remained at a distance while Moses went forward to receive revelation on their behalf. What some Hasidic commentators say is that the only thing the people actually heard was the first letter of Anochi, Anochi being I, God. That's the very first word of the 10 Commandments. And since the first letter is a silent aleph, what they heard was, you know, just a breath. That's all they heard. So again, if you subscribe to that concept, then obviously this was a very flawed moment because it was just too overwhelming for people. This is clearly different. In contrast to this exclusionary or passive revelation, the covenant ceremony in Parashat Nitzavim repeatedly emphasizes inclusion and participation. The ceremony begins by declaring that all members of the community are present. You stand this day, all of you, before Adonai, and then goes on to list the groups who are represented: your tribal heads, your elders, and your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from woodchopper to water drawer, from the elites to the most economically and socially disadvantaged. Everyone in the community is explicitly acknowledged and welcomed, because woodchopper and water drawer are at the bottom rung of society. While Parashat Nitzavim does not go as far as we might wish to eliminate the hierarchy between these groups, it does teach us a key lesson that everyone, including the most marginalized, must have a seat at the table. The seemingly redundant ceremony shows us that the presence and affirmation of the entire community is crucial to truly entering the covenant. So that is, I think, a very nice way of thinking about it. If you want to know more about Judith Plaskow, who, I don't like the way this looks. Judith Plaskow is one of the feminist commentators who basically says, you know, women were not included.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is kind of silly, I guess, but
No, nothing.
why would water bearers and wood choppers, the community could not exist without the heat and the water. So they shouldn't have been at the bottom.
We're going to go into a commentary about why they are at the bottom.
And don't we have like Rebecca at the well? I mean, isn't that these are the matriarchs that were water drawers, right? So
yeah.
This is important.
Well, yeah, in certain cases, yeah. Well, we're going to go into some commentary about that. So it's a very good question. But this is, you know, it's now, of course, there is not only a hierarchy, but there's still the patriarchy, because it's men and then wives, right? It's not men and women.
Right.
But
right.
let's not push these people too far. This was thousands of years ago, okay?
Right.
All right, does anybody want to comment on any of this before we move forward? Welcome, Randy. How's Ryan doing, by the way?
He was getting ready for surgery at 10 to 6, and they had 2 other emergency surgeries, so he's scheduled for this afternoon. And he thanks you all for your prayers and concern.
Yeah, poor Ryan had an infection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just from a blister, right? I mean, just like you just don't even know. Sometimes, I mean, I know somebody who had like a cut in their knee or something and they got strep or one of those awful, almost died from it. I mean, it's just weird how things just develop out of nowhere. Anyway, we wish him well.
Yes.
Okay, let me share the next piece here. Okay, so, and to answer your question directly and immediately, chop wood, draw water. David Kasher is really great. He used to send out a Torah commentary every week, and then he went off to Ikar and he stopped doing it. So I'd love to get more of his commentaries because they're always kind of different.
He went off where?
Ikar, which is it's called an emergent congregation in Los Angeles. It's a very social justice oriented congregation, and he's one of the rabbis there. That's what happens when you go from being a freelance person to actually having a job, I think. Okay, so here's what Rashi says. From your wood choppers to your water drawers. This teaches us that in the days of Moses, some Canaanites came to convert, just as the Gibeonites came in the days of Joshua. For this is what is said about the Gibeonites, and they also acted cunningly. So Moses made them wood choppers and water drawers. Of course, that makes no sense to anybody. We're going to explain what all that means. In the book of Joshua, we read that the Gibeonites claimed to be a distant people who had journeyed to join the Israelites out of admiration, right? And this is while the Israelites are crossing through the desert, and Israel agreed to accept the Gibeonites, but later discovered that they had been lying and that they were actually a local enemy tribe, just seeking security from the Israeli attack, right? Because the Israelites are coming in to take over the land. And since Joshua gave his word and, said, you can be part of our community, he couldn't kick them out, but he condemned them to this curse. Your descendants shall always be servants, wood choppers and water drawers for the house of my God. So it's a punishment.
Curse.
Or curse, yeah. Here they are meant to represent positions of servitude, assigned as a punishment for deception. So Rashi reads this context backwards into Deuteronomy and assumes our wood chopper and water drawer were also converts from the local population. There's no such thing as a real convert in those days. It's just people who join their fate to those of the Israelites. But here's the problem with Rashi. Joshua is the book that comes after Deuteronomy. And that's when the curse is given. So how is it that there are already water drawers and wood choppers before that happens? Okay, so.
Because there's no before and after in the Torah.
Thank you.
I've learned something here anyway.
You have. Okay, but that's not what David Kasher is going to say. But there are a number of problems with this explanation. First, it's disgraceful to think that Moses would have given new converts the most demeaning jobs in the community, and then called that out in front of everyone. Finally, and perhaps most difficult from a narrative perspective, this interpretation forces us to see the earlier book of Deuteronomy referencing the later book of Joshua. It is as if what Moses is saying made no sense on its own at the time and only later came to have meaning once the story of the Gibeonites was explained by Joshua in the future. That's an awkward way to think of these opening phrases in Moses's great speech. Would the people there have even understood what Moses was talking about, right? I mean, if the curse is later, how could they even understand what Moses is saying? Who knows? Now, what would be ideal instead is if there were prior instances in the Torah of these categories, and Moses was hearkening backwards to reference an earlier context. And it turns out that all that is exactly what we find when we look backwards in the Torah. There is exactly one other mention of a wood chopper and one other mention of a water drawer. Our wood chopper can be found just a few chapters back in Deuteronomy, in Parshat Shoftim, in the description of a case of involuntary manslaughter. When someone goes with his fellow into the woods to chop wood, As his arm swings the axe to cut down a tree, the axe head flies off the handle and strikes the other so that he dies. Okay, that's an involuntary manslaughter. You didn't mean to kill the guy, but maybe you should have checked your axe before you went out. But anyway, then the first one must flee into one of the cities of refuge and live there. Remember, we talked about the cities of refuge. You go there until the high priest dies, and no one's supposed to be able to get to you, because otherwise, this guy whose head got cut off or whatever by the axe, his family is going to come and want to kill you.
When cities declare themselves to be sanctuary cities, do they ever reference this?
Well, it's not that they declare themselves, the Torah declares them to be sanctuary cities.
No, I'm talking about now. We have.
Oh, now? Oh, no.
They never
You know,
reference that.
First of all, these laws are if we were a theocracy, which Israel is not, despite appearances to the contrary, where the ultra-Orthodox have so much power, but they don't follow the laws in here as such, no. I don't know if they ever followed them, to tell you the truth, right? But anyway, it's fun to talk about them anyway. The cities of refuge mentioned several times in the Torah are designated centers of asylum for those who committed a terrible act, but accidentally, with no malintent. They're being pursued by the outraged family of the deceased, but can find safety in these cities of refuge. If they leave this sanctuary, however, they no longer have the protection of the law. And the classic case of this kind of exile from the community is the anonymous woodchopper. So the woodchopper is somebody who needs to be in exile. So it's not somebody, who's a liar, like the other interpretation. It's just someone who's done something by mistake that's pretty horrible. Our water drawer, meantime, is a far more famous character. And this is, who said Rebecca before?
Rebecca, yeah.
Who said that before? Somebody said, how about Rebecca? She's a water drawer.
I think Jason did.
Jason, see? So we got all these, really, really astute people. We don't even need these commentaries. Okay. Our water drawer, meanwhile, is a far more famous character, right? There's several stories in the Torah of women drawing water from a well. But only one of them uses the specific language of drawing, shoeva. It is the tale of Abraham's servant traveling in search of a wife for Isaac. Here he tells what happened. I came today to the spring and I said, "O Lord God, my master Abraham, if you would please grant success to me on my way. As I stand by the spring of water, let the young woman who comes out to draw and to whom I say, please, let me drink a little water from your jar, and who answers, you may drink and I will also draw for your camels. Let her be the wife whom the Lord has decreed for my master's son." Remember, Eliezer, who's Abraham's servant, is going to find a wife for Isaac, and he's waiting for a sign that he find the right woman, and it's the woman who's generous enough to give him water and also to give water to his camels. I had scarcely finished praying in my heart when Rebecca came out with her jar on her shoulder and went down to the spring and drew. Rebecca, the second of the great matriarchs. She is the first water drawer. And it was through her water drawing that she showed herself to be a righteous woman worthy of God's covenant. She was then a foreign woman, right? She's from the land that Abraham came from, which is back in the Mesopotamian area. But because of her kindness to travelers and even their beasts of burden, she would become the mother of Israel. A water drawer and a wood chopper. Rebecca and the refugee. Here we have two members of the people of Israel, one nearly a prisoner and the other nearly royalty. So the guy who escaped to the city of refuge is the refugee, and Rebecca is nearly royalty. She's our matriarch. And perhaps this disparity is part of what Moses is referencing. From your wood chopper to your water drawer, from the bottom to the top, the most wretched to the most exalted. So contrary to what some people see the water drawer and the wood chopper as the lowliest, he's looking at it as the lowliest to the highest. I took out a thing in there where he said, well, what does it mean from the wood chopper to the water drawer. That doesn't make any sense, but he is making it make sense according to his own interpretation. But there are also other things that these two people have in common. Both are leaving their homes, one to enter into our community and the other to flee from it. And both are recognized to be people of pure intention. The woodchopper is guilty of manslaughter, but we know he meant no harm. So he will have to temporarily leave the place he's from, but he will not be cut off from the people of Israel. The water drawer is at first a suspicious character, an outsider, but she soon reveals an inner essence so admirable that we beg her to leave the place she's from and come join our people. These then are two perfect examples of Moses to use to define the boundaries of the congregation that stands before him. Who is in our community? Who will be counted among the people of Israel? The case of the woodchopper teaches us that no one among us can ever be cut off, no matter what he does, so long as we know him to be pure of heart. The case of the water drawer teaches us to seek out the righteous among the nations and ask them to join us. Can a Jew ever be cut off from his people? When should an outsider be welcomed into the congregation? On one side of the community, we have the question of who we would drive out. Should be whom, but I didn't write this. And on the other side, the question of whom we will let in. And the answer to both of those questions, Moses suggests, is determined not by status, but by character. For we are to be a people of righteousness who love justice and revere compassion. Our mother is a foreigner and our brother is a refugee. They stand with us here today and we stand with them. I think that's really beautiful. And as a matter of fact, once you are in the congregation of Israel, once you become a Jew, or if you're born a Jew, you're always a Jew. You can't leave. You can be an apostate, someone who renounces Judaism. I don't know if Teresa and your Beit Din, is that what they were talking? I know they did it in one of the Beit Dins. They talked about that.
I don't remember that.
Might have been another one. I did 3 of them on that day. But yeah, you can't ever say, well, I'm not a Jew anymore. Even if you convert to another religion, you're still a Jew. And what I love about that, what David Kosher says, but also in the story of Ruth, it's not about, your origin, your ethnic origin, or your status in society. It's who you are deep inside. And that's really the message of the book of Ruth, which is she's, a Moabite. You're not supposed to have anything to do with Moabites, but they accept her in the congregation because she's a good person. And then eventually she becomes the great-great-grandmother of King David. So, okay, hey, guess what? It's not about where you're from, it's who you are. And you get to be the, great-great-grandmother of the, exalted king of Israel. I think it's really, really beautiful. And I mean, this is not the traditional way that wood chopper and water drawer are understood. But again, that's because the traditional way is looking ahead at the book of Joshua, not behind. And you can weave things the way you choose to weave them in these midrashes. Any comments, questions? No? Okay. So we'll move on with the next comment. Okay. This woman says, I was not at Sinai, and I was thinking that it was going to be like Judith Plaskow, because Judith Plaskow, says women weren't there, and there's poetry about that. In fact, Merle Feld has a great poem that I've read periodically about the women were taking care of the kids and doing all the stuff women do, and so they couldn't get to the mountain, right? But this is a little different. The Torah tells us, it is not only with you that I make this covenant and this oath, but with those who are standing here with us this day before the Lord our God, and those who are not with us here this day. By the way, I don't know what those blue underlines are. They just appeared. Maybe somebody knows how all these different systems work. But I copy various commentaries that I find, and then these blue lines appear. So, Doug, do you have any idea? No? Okay. I really don't know. I mean, It's not a
That's right.
hyperlink because like Deuteronomy
It is
30.
a hyperlink, but you know what? When I moved things over for my presentation, I had stuff within the PowerPoint, but then mine would disappear. Like I would have them until I turned it on to the actual presentation itself, and then they would disappear, but they were there before.
Oh, so it is a hyperlink? Okay, maybe
But
that's,
but when you
That's
click
right.
on it, it doesn't show up as a hyperlink. Like you can click even when you're outside of speaker view and it doesn't take you someplace else. So maybe it was
Yeah, but-
originally a hyperlink.
I
Yeah.
think it's actually grammar because it needs an extra period at the end.
but
I think
So
it's
if
just
you-
marking grammar that,
no, but like wood chop. Oh, they don't like the way wood chopper is?
yeah.
Oh.
So they're saying, yeah, and they say they would, if you clicked on it, it would tell you it wouldn't want a comma there probably.
Oh, okay. Because I'm a big grammar person, but okay, wood chopper. They don't like the way wood chopper is written. But you know what? In terms of grammar, they didn't pick up on
Well,
who we would
punctuation.
drive out, huh?
I think it's punctuation more than grammar for the blue.
Yeah, I
thing.
don't think it likes, I think it's using the non-Oxford, I think it wants the non-Oxford.
Oh, so it's punctuation.
Yeah, because there's
Oh,
so without a
oh, you're
comma, and
right.
it underlines that one, and then there's another one where it
I
has
see.
comma
Yeah.
before the and, which it doesn't like.
Okay, you're right. It must be punctuation. Yeah, it's the comma. They don't like the commas. Yeah.
Yeah,
and the wood
Rabbi,
chopper.
we've already lost who and whom. I mean, we're not going to win that one back.
No. It drives me crazy. Drives me crazy. Where it drives IT apostrophe S and who and whom and some of those things just drive me crazy. Okay, whatever.
I
I
still
have
remember and historic, and people look at me like, what? Did anyone
know
have to learn that as a young one?
I have a t-shirt that says I am silently correcting your grammar, but I've never had the nerve to wear it. Okay.
I have the same shirt and I have worn it many times.
Oh, okay. There's some other ones that drive me crazy too, but I will not say what they are. I'm going to take out these bracketed things because they don't refer to anything that I have here.
Don't be like my friend Peter, who used to actually correct people's grammar as they were speaking to him.
Oh, no. I would never be so rude. I don't think. I hope not. Did anybody ever read Eat, Shoots, and Leaves? No? Oh, that.
Yes,
You're-
and that's what, when you were talking, that's what I was thinking of.
And that's where a comma is very important.
It's extremely important. People don't think about how important it is because
Yeah.
we produce that little juncture in speech because of the little breath that we take that changes meaning. But you have to have the
Absolutely.
comma there in writing. Otherwise, radical change of meaning.
Yep. Jason, have you ever read that? Eat, Shoots, and Leaves? Oh, he went. Okay, did you
Yeah,
read?
I went to go look for it.
Oh. There's that one. And there's another one that's really good too that was written by a New Yorker copy editor. But anyway, okay. Now at least I know what those little blue lines are. I was trying to think, what the heck? Okay. All right. So we are told that we're making this covenant with those who are here and those who are not yet here. Okay. The Talmud famously explains that those who are not with us here this day applies to all subsequent generations of those born Jewish and all converts in the future. As I said, I love that. I think that's just wonderful. From this mystical perspective, all of the souls, okay, what are the little dots under there? That must be some other. Do you know what that is, Suzanne?
They want you to take out of.
Ah, okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. All right. I didn't write any of this, so I'm not taking any responsibility for grammatical or orthographic mistakes. Okay, my cat is crying. All of the souls of all Jews, including would-be converts, have the Torah inscribed upon them. The covenant is hardwired into us. Parshat Nitzavim hints at this inherent relationship. That's the Torah portion we're reading right now. The Torah we read is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart to observe it. By the way, does any of this sound familiar from High Holidays? Anybody else? Every year we read this. Okay, but we read it in Hebrew, so maybe no one knows what we're reading. Maybe we'll continue having the superscript like we did this past year. All right, that some souls are predestined to connect to Torah, which I understand in the most expansive sense, misses what it means to choose Judaism. So what she doesn't like here is the fact that, you know, if we say that all of us were there, if you think of it in less than literal terms, it means that, you know, it's just something that was sort of either hardwired into us or imposed on us. And she doesn't like that because she chose Judaism. It wasn't just something that was in her. And I would venture to say that it might be both, but we can have a conversation about that. In another famous Talmudic passage, one sage teaches that God held a mountain, remember I said, over the heads of the people and said, if you accept the Torah, excellent. If not, here you will be buried. To this midrash, Rav Acha bar Yaakov responds, from this teaching, there is a substantial caveat to the obligation to fulfill the Torah. Rashi explains that Rav Acha is pointing out the lack of freedom of choice in this scenario. If Israel is called to judgment as to why they do not fulfill what they have accepted upon themselves, they are able to respond, comma, but our acceptance was coerced and therefore null. Those born hardwired with the Torah in their souls have only the choice between life and good, death and evil. That's one of the things we also read. I set before you life and death, good and evil, choose life. I hope that at least is familiar to somebody from High Holidays, because not only is it what we read, but I've given a couple of sermons about it. Okay. The life and good if they choose Torah, the death and evil if they don't. This is why I say I was not at Sinai. I was not born with a mountain hanging over my head, nor was I born with a knife in my heart. Well, that was based on a poem she happens to mention. These are not choices. These are inheritances. I chose this path because of my Jewish teachers, because of Jewish spiritual practices, because of Judaism's intellectual maturity, because of the spiritual language of this tradition, and because of Jewish community. I chose being Jewish because in it, I did indeed see life and good, death and evil. But in the choosing, there was no coercion whatsoever. Quite the opposite. This means that the choice between life and good, death and evil is a free choice made based on the merits of Judaism and Jewish people. If there's anything I believe I have to offer as a ger, which means a convert, that is unique, it is a Judaism that is not born with a mountain suspended over its head without a knife in its heart, that this soul was born into Judaism having been drawn in by its wisdom, its saints and mystics, and its teachers. So let's have a little conversation about that, because I would venture to suggest that particularly in the Reform movement, anybody who in any way practices Judaism is a Jew by choice. If you're born into the...
They don't have to convert? They don't have to...
No, what I'm saying is, if you're born into the Orthodox community, you don't really have much of a choice, right? You go to shul, you do your challah, you do your this or that, right? It's just what you do. Mm-hmm. And there is a coercive factor in that you will be shunned if you don't participate in that. In the Reform movement, sadly, even though we're supposed to be choosing what applies to us and following that, all too often people just don't do anything, right? I've told you before, I have sisters who do zilch, zilch, zilch. No participation in any way, okay?
I wonder why.
Well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah, okay.
But I mean, how many people in California, 20% of Jews are affiliated, 20. The other 80%, maybe some of them do some stuff, but many of them do nothing. They're not interested. I have a lot of friends who are Jewish who do nothing. I'm sure you all do as well. So if we choose to come to Torah study or to come to services or to, celebrate holidays, we're doing that as a choice, right? Right. So I'm not saying you're a Jew by choice as in you're a convert, you're making a choice.
I think there's so much to that because especially early on and being part of a very conservative congregation, even though it was in the Bay Area. And then with Hillel winding up within a Reform congregation within San Francisco, there was a significant difference. There wasn't a lot of choice in the conservative. There really weren't choices. It wasn't provided. not that it's necessarily said within reform you have a choice, but the reality is we have a choice. We have a myriad of choices. We can choose the level of participation, the depth of participation, what it means in our heart. All of these various components are part of reform. Within conservative, it was, this is what the schedule is, and that you're expected to be there. They're just, that's just the way it is. And it was a very big deal because they had to make sure everyone was there. There was the, as far as looking at the minyan and making sure that we had the minyan for all the various functions that happened within that shul. It was a very big deal. Coming to reform, and I went from a fairly small conservative congregation to Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco, which is massive. But it was almost, I had to sit down with one of the rabbis. Well, that also shows how large it was, with one of the rabbis, and say, okay, how do I, what are my paths to participation here? Because there were so many different ways and choices and parts, and you could do one thing and maybe not do something else. And that was okay. There was not I'm not going to say a pressure. It wasn't really a pressure in conservative. It's just, this is how it goes. This is what you do. This is how we're doing it. There wasn't a choice component in it at all. And I think that that's one of the interesting aspects in what you're saying, through that making a choice. As reform, we have so many choices that we're able to make. And we can make those choices and make a different choice next time. And that's also okay. And that wasn't okay in conservative.
Doug, you must have come from a very conservative synagogue. I'm from a conservative synagogue in Redlands, and I never really, I felt the pressure, particularly in the last years, because the congregation had gotten so old and so small. So I really did feel a responsibility showing up, because a lot of times when I came in, I made the minyan. But this Exodar is a very liberal conservative community. They had a female rabbi for years. Women read Torah, and I think really the question that Suzanne asked, I think, is so pertinent, which is, why are Jews making the choice not to participate, not to be part of the community, not to study Torah? No one's asking you to learn Hebrew, just show up. And they won't even do that. And I think that's a very, very pertinent question. And one, of course, that I feel that we need to address, especially for the future. Temple Bethel has a nice, one of the things I really enjoy about Bethel, it has a nice cohesiveness to it, and it has a density to it that is missing up at Exodar. I mean, there's a real difference for me, a real community difference, feeling of community. And that's a huge factor,
Absolutely.
And Jane, that's a really good point. This particular congregation up in Daly City was a very, very small and ever shrinking. There were very few, there really weren't children. There weren't very many young people. And eventually that congregation under Rabbi Cohen would then fold and merge into another group. So that group had actually become, and he had even said, had become more conservative. It was a conservative shul that became more conservative over time.
Wow.
And as it continued to shrink, it became more and more conservative, trying desperately to hold on to what it had from its community. But the lesson that I learned from all that was the importance of exactly that, people showing up and having these different parts within the community to help maintain a vibrant community.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to the issue of choice. Yeah, Jason.
Well, this is bringing to mind a couple of things. There's a saying that asks, do you give to the ones you love, or do you love the ones you give to? And sometimes it can be framed into people, but it can also be framed like in terms of animals, right? As a kid, you might get a pet hamster and you care for that hamster, and you care for that hamster, and you become very attached to it because you feed it and you care for it and you clean its cage. But then you don't necessarily extend this to all hamsters. But but then if you think about what does it mean to be participatory in a congregation, I mean, you show up to things, you give some time, and that brings back a reciprocal effect of that you get value from it, and therefore you care about it. And if you don't make the first step of showing up and joining some classes and volunteering once in a while or attending some events, you don't have anything invested in it. So it takes that kick of that step to show that you have something that you put into it in order to, like, I think that's what people generally miss, is if they don't push themselves that first step. I mean, when I got into this congregation many years ago, I had no connection to a temple before, and I didn't know what to expect back from it. But people started encouraging me, take a class, come to this, because once you start doing that, you're invested in it, and then you've given of yourself, and it's given back to you, and that brings about a love for it that makes you really care about its future and its vibrancy, right?
So let me ask you a question. So we're talking about choice versus coercion. And what makes you decide that you want to either convert to Judaism or make a choice to be involved with the synagogue or with Jewish practice? Is it a choice? Is it coercion? Is it both?
It's in your heart.
It's in your heart. So therefore, I think part of it is not choice. And I think Teresa's nodding. I think, no, I mean, when you decide I need to convert to Judaism, there's something pushing you, and I'll draw a parallel to my decision to become a rabbi. I was a TV producer for 20 years. And why did I decide? I could give you a whole bunch of reasons for why, but that wouldn't be really the reason. It was something that was propelling me inside that I really couldn't explain. So that's where I think that this writer is a little bit off.
Mhm.
Because yes, you're making the choice out of free will. Nobody is handcuffing you and saying, go to that shul or be on the board or do whatever, or convert, or, but there's something impelling you to do it, right? And I think it's got to be a combination of both. Teresa, go ahead.
Yeah, I heard the choice thing really early on, and I never liked that term. It seemed like something you could take or leave, and that's not how I felt about it. I mean, once I realized it was what I wanted, I just couldn't get it fast enough, and I couldn't get enough, and it just had to be, and I never had any doubts. It's just like something that should have been born that way, but wasn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't feel like choice, but I can see how it would be that way for other people. I mean, maybe it's both, just for different people.
Randy?
I think too, also part of the coercion is because I'm fairly connected to those who are Jews by choice. Someone was sharing with me not too long ago that they were introduced by someone in our congregation as a convert, and how that struck them to the core of their being, because there's not supposed to be any reference to that once that affirmation of being, the whole experience has happened. So it saddens me deeply as a Jew by choice to hear stories such as that, where that distinction is made in the coercion. Had you been born like the rest of us, the person wasn't being disingenuous or anything, but just the mere fact that they would bring that up to a stranger was so inappropriate. And I've had to do some talking with this person to try to not ease that pain, but hear what they were saying and affirm that was not an acceptable way of being introduced, and how even we within the Reform movement have some more road to travel, I guess.
Thank you. So, Rick Jacobs, oh, I'm sorry. Jason, do you want to?
Well, no, just what that made me think of was, I I've always felt like if I hadn't been born to this, I would have been drawn to it. It would have, I would have needed what it offers, and I wouldn't have found it in other traditions. So I know that it was just an accident that I was born to it. It's a blessing that other people can find it, right? But that word drawn appeals to me more than coerce, because coerce feels more like someone is pushing you and it involves another person. And I was thinking about what a water drawer is, right? You know, like just drawn, it's something we need. It nourishes, I mean, it's full, we need the water. We must be drawn, you know, I don't know, there's something there that feels like it connects, that it's part of our very essential humanity. We must be, you know, we must drink. We must be receiving something that we need.
Very nice, very nice. I was just going to say, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who's the head of the Union for Reform Judaism, said a couple years ago, the new reality of synagogues is that synagogues don't necessarily come with Jews, in the sense that don't just assume that because you have a synagogue, you know, if you build it, they will come, right? I mean, people are no longer just assuming that they're going to join a synagogue, you know, and that's obviously a much larger question, you know, like how do you get more people to feel that there's a reason to pursue Judaism? I mean, you know, coming from a Holocaust survivor, my mother, I've always felt that the theologian Emil Fackenheim said there's a 614th commandment. You know, traditionally there's 613, and the 614th commandment is not to give Hitler a posthumous victory by abandoning Judaism. And that's been very, very important for me. I mean, that's not the only reason I'm involved, but it is also very important. And it really makes me sad to think that people are just going to abandon it after all these years of fighting for it. And also to give it up to the ultra-Orthodox. You know, I mean, that should not be the surviving form of Judaism. And if it is, eventually, I suppose there'll be a reform movement that grows out of it. But I would not like to see that, you know, progressive liberal Judaism fades away because people say, it's not relevant, you know?
No, I think that's also when I was at the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and I was actually following a group around, and it was a bunch of American guys. They were probably 18 to 20. And the person who was giving the tour was from Jerusalem and was talking to them and just kind of overall, and had said something about, well, I'm just curious, when was the last time, and she's talking to this group, that you were at shul? And one of them said, well, I had to do something after my bar mitzvah. I don't remember what I had to do. But it was, so many of them chimed in yes. And she said, okay. And she said, so I'm curious if we're at here, as we continue going through this experience together today, I'm curious of where you're going to wind up. So later, I wound up in the same section again with this group, because as you go through, you can't just walk through in a linear way. You walk through in anyway, we wound up together again. And by that point, the conversation had changed of not even a responsibility, not a coercion, but why it's so important to make that choice to participate, to be part of the greater, broader Jewish experience, regardless of what group you belong to, but why it is so important to do this, and what that means, and how there's so many different levels of participation. So when we were talking earlier, that's one of the first things that came into mind, was this conversation with these 18 to 20-year-olds who are kind of like, I don't know, it's been years. I don't know. I'm just, next year I'm gonna go ahead and do my birthright trip. Woo, yeah, you know, that whole sensation, that whole feeling, or whatever it might be. But there was something much deeper in that entire experience. And for anybody who was around, and it was anybody in that room, in that little section, could hear this entire conversation. It was very deep. Leaving that room, I think anybody who would have heard this would have felt for a moment to reflect upon their own connection to their bigger, broader Jewish community. I don't think you could have left that room, and it had nothing to do with the exhibit. It had nothing to do with the content that was being presented. It was through this reaction of this guide with this group of 18 to 20-year-olds.
I think the connection is that here is this people that, you know, survived all these horrible experiences. And a couple generations later, you have people who don't, you know, kind of take it for granted and don't really feel that there's anything to fight for or to even participate in, you know, and that's kind of sad. Okay, so thank you for that discussion. I'm going to share the final piece, which is also by Rabbi David Kosher. And this goes to this strange thing about wormwood and gall. So we've come to the end of a long series of curses meant to warn the children of Israel that if they fail to keep the commandments once they are in the land of Canaan, they're doomed in all kinds of terrible ways. And now that they understand what they're getting into, God is ready to pronounce a covenant with the people, all the people, even those who are not with us this day. But there's one exception. Perchance there is among you a man or a woman or a family or a tribe whose heart is turning away from the Lord our God to go and worship the other gods of the nations. Perchance there is among you a root sprouting gall and wormwood. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but it's kind of a weird thing here in the middle of everything.
It was hemlock in the other translation.
Oh, really?
Which is the word that I knew. I don't know sprouting gall, but
Well,
hemlock,
I
we
just-
associate that as like, you know, with Socrates.
That's interesting, because let me just see what this commentary says. It's verse 17. Let's see how they translate it here. Okay, this one says a stalk sprouting poison weed and wormwood. Hebrew rosh is poison. Here, a poisonous plant often identified with hemlock, by which Socrates was put to death. La'ana is probably wormwood, a very bitter but non-poisonous plant.
Yeah, I was
Okay,
gonna
so
ask, wormwood is not familiar to me. I don't.
So you know what? They probably don't exactly know what it is. All right, let's see what he has to say about it. Gall and wormwood? We know that this is a person who sinned, somehow forsaking God, but what is this sprouting root metaphor doing here? Because it says sprouting gall and wormwood.
Huh.
The Hebrew words used here are rosh and la'ana, and scholars have tried to identify them with various plants. But many translations have landed on gall poppy, a type of opium, and wormwood herb, which produces a bitter dark green oil. If that is so, then the two plants represent intoxication and bitterness. The Torah provides its own explanation of the metaphor in the next verse when it says, when such a one hears these words of this curse, he blesses himself in his heart, saying, I will have peace, for I will follow my own willful heart. So this growth of bitterness and confusion is taking place in the heart. We've identified the location of the root, but that doesn't help us much. For what does it mean that he then blesses himself in his heart and follows his heart? And when he does, what peace does he seek? A remarkable explanation is provided by Rabbi Yaakov Zvi Mecklenburg, one of the great 19th century German commentators, in his Hakatav veHakabbalah. Mecklenburg takes us deep into the psychology of such a person and reveals a painful inner struggle underlying all the bitterness. This is a man at whose core lies a deterioration of the fundamentals and features which are the very essence of our Torah. When he hears all of this, all the particulars of the covenant and the specifics of the commandments covering various topics, some of which have their reasons explained and some that the intellect cannot grasp, then he prays to himself saying, look, the truth is there are many commandments that we are baffled by. My heart struggles to understand them, and I find myself in constant battle and conflict. Sometimes I'm able to bring myself to observe them, and sometimes I cannot. For they are things that reason does not seem to require, and I am unable to grasp their purpose. Therefore, I will only follow those which make sense to my heart and to my intellect, and what my conscience tells me is truly reasonable. And thus I will have peace free from internal conflict. For when I do only those things that seem reasonable and true, my soul will be content and I will delight in them. Actually, what's interesting here is, there are many commandments in the Torah that are not explained, right? And you're supposed to just follow them because God said so. But this explanation here, which I'm sure is not what he meant, sounds a lot like how Reform Jews look at the commandments. If they make sense to me, if they work for me, if I find them consonant with my reason, I will follow them. Otherwise, I won't. Maybe one day one of these will make sense to me, but not just yet. So Mecklenburg begins by condemning this corrupted man who rejects the very essence of our Torah, but he ends up humanizing him, giving us a sensitive and nuanced treatment of the kind of turmoil that prompts this kind of rejection. It is hard not to relate. Why should I observe the commandment of shotness, which is that I should not mix linen and wool? That makes no sense to me, right? And actually even the kosher laws, why shouldn't I eat a pig? It didn't say don't eat it because, it just said don't eat it. So why am I following this? Which is why a lot of people say, why am I doing Judaism at all? Doesn't make any sense to me. And by the way, the Reform movement really began as very much connected to reason. So any prayer that didn't make sense, on a literal level was changed or taken out, right? So when we say that God mechaye metim, which means God revives the dead, well, we don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, so change that. But you can understand it metaphorically. And now we understand that it's okay not to be completely reasonable. Yes.
Rabbi, do you remember several years ago, one of these Torah studies, it was just before Passover, and we started a discussion and we realized that everybody had a different definition of what it meant to be kosher for Passover, that every single person in that room honored it in a different way. But what was the takeaway for me was we all were making an effort in our own way. And that was, to me, the important part. And that's what I've always tried to stress to people is, if you choose to do at least one of the commandments, but maybe not all 613, does it really matter whether you do 100, 300, or 612? The point is that you've made a choice to undertake some of it, right? And that's part of the journey to me, is at least you've made some push in that way, right? And that's the exploration. But if you don't ever try to do any of them, then you have no idea what they can bring you. So there's
absolutely. But if you were Orthodox, you'd say one is not enough.
Right.
No,
And
the rabbis say that, as I remember it from my Orthodox friends, you're not obligated to do all of them. You can't. Nobody can do 613 commandments, but you should do as many as you can. And that's a very flexible number, I think.
Well, here's the thing, 613, there about half of them relate to animal sacrifice. So even if we wanted
don't do that.
Of course.
Right.
And there might be things that you can't do, but there's certain things that are, kosher laws, honoring the Sabbath, blah, blah, I've just been I do this daily Talmud study. It's a shortened version. It's not the entire page.
Uh-huh.
But we've been going through Eruvin, which is Eruv is that boundary that you place so that you can carry things on Shabbat. And oh my God, it's so complicated, what's acceptable and what isn't. And I mean, they go through every possible permutation. But so, it's not even like everybody's going to, even in the Orthodox world, not everyone's going to follow it in the same way, right? Because the rabbi of that particular community might say it's okay to do this, and another rabbi is going to say it isn't. But yeah, I mean, the effort is important, definitely. And, what's his name? Okay, it's escaping me. Oh, Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig was a German Jewish philosopher, and he was actually about to convert to Christianity. And and on Yom Kippur, he went to a shul and he decided not to. But when asked whether he would lay tefillin, he said, not yet. So not yet is the answer for, especially for Reform Jews. Like, at the moment doesn't make sense. Maybe it will one day. Rabbi Michael Lotger, whom some of you know, wears tefillin when he prays. And he's very Reform like me, but he said, he's a scientist and his left brain is very active. And he said, if I do something like this, which makes no sense, it helps me, get into prayer.
Okay.
Okay, my answer is not yet to that, but maybe one day I'll do it. So
I know people that, I really feel that the Orthodox are the whipping boys of why I don't do anything as a Jew. I I think my responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, is what can I do during the day that reminds me that I am a Jew? That really is a core part of it. I mean, my mother, when I first became observant, and my parents had brought me up to be an atheist. When I told her I was keeping a kosher kitchen, she said, "Why are you doing that? That's so ridiculous, you know?" But I told her it makes a difference to me because when I eat and when I put the dishes in the dishwasher, I can tell how much meat I've had over the course of the week. And she was a vegetarian, so then I could say, and how many vegetarian meals I had over the course of the week, you know, trying to make it acceptable to her. But I think that if it doesn't start there, and I don't know how you get it to start there, that's how I really became an observant Jew. Is it started in a very inward kind of change. Very, you know, all I wanted to do was do what my grandmother did. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I was just copying my grandmother.
Nice.
You know, she kept a kosher house and she went to shul and she had a little Yiddish Bible, you know, that kind of stuff. That's all I wanted to do. And that's what has, that was the push that has led to all of this. But that's pretty much, you know, and I don't even do it consciously anymore. I mean, I know Orthodox people and they have to say Baruch Hashem 100 times a day and they keep a count. I never say that, you know, but there are these other ways, you know, doing the studying, that kind of stuff. That tells me I'm Jewish.
Great.
You know,
I'm just going to finish this article just so we get it finished before we sign off. Okay. So we're back to Mecklenburg, who said, you know, who's trying to understand why this person is rejecting, right? We go back to this thing here, somebody here whose heart is turning away from God, right? Sprouting gall and wormwood, right? And so now we're understanding this, at least he's giving the guy the benefit of the doubt, right? His heart is struggling to understand the reasons for certain commandments. There are those commandments, after all, that we all acknowledge are mysterious, incomprehensible. Some of us simply accept them, but he is locked in a constant battle. He cannot ignore the dissonance he feels between his reason and his faith. All he wants is to feel an inner calm in his religious life. He wants his faith to make sense. I mean, I really don't think this is the kind of person that the Torah is talking about, but Mecklenburg is being very kind, and we can certainly relate to this kind of person, right? Because none of us here are rejecting everything, otherwise we wouldn't be here this morning. He does not propose to abandon the commandments entirely, only to leave aside those practices which strain reason and credulity. He's seeking a religious life that he can truly embrace with his whole heart. He wants nothing more than to be able to take delight in his service of God. Is that so wrong? So who is this suffering soul? Who is cursed with this heart full of gall and wormwood? Here in our parsha, he remains anonymous. But there is one figure later in the Bible who will return to this image again and again, the prophet Jeremiah. You know, obviously, if you know your Bible really well, like David Kosher does, you can find all kinds of connections and references, right? In the book of Jeremiah, we read this passage filled with language that seems directly borrowed from our Torah portion. God said, because they forsook the Torah that I set before them and did not heed my voice and did not follow it, but instead followed their own, that's why that's their willful heart, and followed the foreign gods as their fathers taught them. Therefore, says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I'm going to feed that people wormwood and make them drink gall. The exact same words. And again, in the book of Lamentations, also traditionally ascribed to Jeremiah, right? We say that Jeremiah wrote that book. We read the following more personalized passage. Remember my affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall. So Jeremiah has ingested these bitter herbs on our behalf, has drunk from these dizzying opiates. They rot miserably in his gut. And if Rabbi Mecklenburg is right about wormwood and gall, then part of what Jeremiah is aching from is an inability to understand the Torah, a confusion over the purpose of the commandments, which is an interesting take. I don't know that anyone else would say that about Jeremiah, but okay. He wants to follow them, to return to the Lord, but he cannot fully reconcile the conflict in his mind and in his heart. Far be it from me to suggest that Jeremiah himself was lacking in faith. But of course, Jeremiah means to speak for us all. We forsook the Torah. We followed our own willful hearts. We ate wormwood and drank gall. We were bitter and confused, and we were miserable. And when Jeremiah switches to the language of the first person, it is because he is encouraging us to do the same, to say, I am the one who the Torah speaks about. Should be whom the Torah speaks about. I am the one whose heart sprouted wormwood and gall. I am the one who has abandoned my faith. Indeed, the chapter of Lamentations we quoted above begins famously with these words, I am the man who has seen affliction. Perchance the Torah asks us delicately, there is among you a man or a woman, a family or a tribe whose heart is turning away from the Lord? We look around. Who is it? Where is the root of this evil? Who is poisoning our waters? I am the man. I am the woman. We are the family. We are the tribe. These things grow inside every one of us. I think Jeremiah actually was probably feeling like he had eaten wormwood and gall because he was pretty maligned in his day and treated pretty badly by everybody. And he was always depressed. But aside from that, but I think the point is well taken that, we don't need to point the finger at other people because we ourselves have our own issues with either our faith or whatever it is. So don't look elsewhere and say, you are not doing the commandments the way you're supposed to, because maybe I'm not. A blanket suggestion, I would say, for every time we want to point the finger at someone else, because we're probably just as guilty as the other person, right? Or we project onto the other person something that we don't like. Any thoughts about any of this? Yes, Jason.
I'm still stuck on the hemlock because it changes the whole translation, that whole piece about intoxication and bitterness. If one of the two is poison, that changes the entire, you can't read that last essay the same way if you're reading one of those words as drinking poison. It's not just drinking bitterness, it's killing yourself. I mean, that's a whole other frame.
True.
And I can't quite escape that, I can't reconcile those.
Okay, so you could think of killing yourself as, killing your spiritual being or something like that, right? I mean, he's reading it as you've ingested the stuff, but the Torah is saying that's the punishment you're going to get from God, which I think in that case probably is hemlock, because God doesn't like it when you turn away from God, right?
Nowadays we have marijuana and cocaine.
Well, those are ways in which people, try to escape from the pain that they feel, right? And what does it do to you? It doesn't really help. It does, doesn't maybe kill you entirely, but it just certainly affects your body in ways. Yes, Teresa.
Well, in California, there's 2 plants, and I don't know, it might not have been this way in Israel, but I think it's wild celery, and it looks a lot like hemlock. And so when you forage or work with plants in this area, you have to really know how to tell the one from the other. So it could have been that there was a plant that was very much, you could eat it, it would nourish you, and that might be like Torah. And then there was this other plant that looked a lot like it that would actually kill you.
Nice. That's a nice way to look at that.
Like mushrooms. Some mushrooms are really healthy and some will kill you.
Yep.
That's why we only buy them in the store. We don't pick them
You don't go
anywhere.
foraging, right? Okay, I lost my Torah. Here it is. Okay. Let's just read a little further. Why is this on, yeah, chapter 30, I think is where we are. No, wait a minute. I know we're in verse 20, but which chapter is it? 29, okay. All right, I'm going to share this. Just read a few more verses and all right. Get down to 29, 20. Yeah, here we are. Okay, does somebody want to read a few of these verses? This is right after we read about, you know, this person who, you know, went after other gods and got wormwood and stuff in them. Here, produces hemlock and wormwood. Yeah, that's what it's translated as here. This person's going to have peace. Well, how are they going to have peace? Well, I don't know. Maybe they think it's peace and it's a false peace. And God's not going to forgive them. And so then what's going to happen? Jason, you want to read a few verses?
Where are we starting?
20.
And the Lord will separate him for evil out of all the tribes of Israel, according to all the curses of the covenant written in this Torah scroll. And a later generation, your descendants, who will rise after you, along with the foreigner who comes from a distant land, will say, upon seeing the plagues of that land and the diseases with which the Lord struck it, sulfur and salt have burned up its entire land. It cannot be sown, nor can it grow anything. Not even any grass will sprout upon it. It is like the overturning of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, which the Lord overturned in his fury and in his rage. And all the nations will say, why did the Lord do so to this land? What is the reason for this great rage of fury? Then they will say, it is because they abandoned the covenant of the Lord God of their fathers, the covenant which he made with them when he took them out of the land of Egypt. For they went and served other deities, prostrating themselves to them deities which
To them deities.
deities which they had not known, and which he did not apportion to them. And the Lord's fury raged against that land, bringing upon it the entire curse written in this book. And the Lord uprooted them from upon their land with fury, anger, and great wrath, and he cast them to another land, as it is this day. The hidden things belong to the Lord our God, but the revealed things apply to us and to our children forever, that we must fulfill all the words of this Torah.
So, you know, not only are people going to be, you know, punished by death and disease and God knows what else, but the land is going to be utterly and totally destroyed. Doug, you want to pick it up here a little bit, chapter 30? I'm hoping we get something nicer to end on. I don't want to end on all of that horrible stuff.
And it will be when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, that you will consider in your heart among all the nations where the Lord your God has banished you. And you will return to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and will listen to his voice according to all that I am commanding you to do this day, you and your children. Then the Lord your God will bring back your exiles and will have mercy upon you. He will once again gather you from the nations where the Lord your God has dispersed you. Even if your exiles see at the end of the heavens, the Lord your God will gather you from there and will take you from there. And the Lord your God will bring to the land which your forefathers possessed, and you too will take possession of it, and he will do good to you and will make you more numerous than your forefathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you may love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul for the sake of your life. And the Lord your God will place all these curses upon your enemies and upon your adversaries who pursued you. And you will return and listen to the voice of the Lord and fulfill at his commandments, which I command you this day. And the Lord your God will make you abundant for good in the work of your hands, in the fruit of your womb, in the fruit of your livestock, and the fruit of your soul. For the Lord will once again rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your forefathers. And when you obey the Lord your God to observe his commandments and his statutes written in this Torah scroll, and when you return to the land your God with all your heart and with all your soul.
Thank you. Okay. Ending on a better place. So, you know, you're going to get punished, but then God will bring you back, which is a theme in a lot of the prophets, like Hosea in particular, who talks about pretty abusive, horrible stuff from a feminist point of view, because it's all written in this language of a husband and his wife who's gone astray, and how she's going to have all these awful things happen to her, but then she'll come back and he'll accept her back. But so this is a theme, as I said, in the prophets, and here as well. You're going to be punished and all this stuff, but then you will be brought back, and everything will be great because you'll have finally realized that you need to follow my commandments. Now, there's an image in there about circumcising the heart, which I believe Jeremiah also refers to. So what does that mean? Let me just ask what that means. What does it
Does
mean?
that mean that God takes out a piece of your heart? I mean, is that
It's a metaphor, I think. So
Yeah,
what does
but-
it mean to circumcise your heart? I mean, what is the metaphor trying to convey?
That your heart will die without God.
That's a good one. I like that.
that you should expose your heart? That
I think it's a way to open your heart, like circumcising, you take off something,
right.
that is blocking maybe in some
Right.
way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's in the language of covenant because of the circumcision issue, but it's a way to open up your heart. You're going to open up your heart to God, and you'll be a different person in that case. Maybe we need to go circumcise the hearts of our family and friends who are rejecting Judaism,
Oh, boy.
coming at you with a scalpel. No, anyway. Okay, so that's a nicer place to end, I think. Although I'm sure we'll get some more curses, believe me. Not done yet, because maybe you didn't get the message the first 15 times. I'm going to let you know again that there's some curses coming your way. Anyway, so thank you guys for an interesting discussion.
Thank
And
you.
don't ask me when the next one is, because I have to look at my calendar.
Week after next.
Weeks.
2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Okay. And meantime, Dr. Doug Moss has another session next Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. And this Sunday at 2 o'clock, we have veganism. So that's something to think about coming to. We've actually got a lot of stuff coming up. There's an interfaith panel. I just added this to the adult ed information. There's an interfaith panel on the 15th at 3 o'clock, which is about suffering. And I'm going to be speaking about suffering in Judaism. I don't know who else is on the panel because they didn't send me that information, but and there's also on November 15th, a challah bake. I don't know if you guys know about this or if it got advertised, but the, it's mainly for the religious school kids, but if I think what they're doing is they're doing it as a sort of first step, and then eventually they're going to maybe make that available to everybody. They're going to show you how to make a challah. And anyway, there's a lot of stuff coming up. And then and then we have a parking lot service we're hoping on November 20th. Parking lot service. On the 13th of November, Miranda is going to talk about her conversion. December 3rd, we have Dr. Martin Schlesselberg talking about COVID, updating us on it. And then I'm planning all the PAR, which is the West Coast rabbis. I'm planning all the programming. So I'm going to record what we do that I think is relevant and make that available to people. For example, there's going to be one by the president of Hebrew Union College, who's a political scientist, who's going to talk about the impact of the election results on the Jewish community. And then I've got somebody coming to talk about Jews of color, which will be in December. So I'll make all that available. Anyway, lots of stuff coming up. Yes, Suzanne.
On the 22nd, I think Randy's
Well, Randy told me he wasn't able to do it. Is that true, Randy?
Is that right or not?
I
That is true.
advertised it, but then he told me he couldn't do it. Well, what's going on?
Yeah.
You're not doing it?
There appears to be some confusion because I exchanged messages with Andrea, who's heading this a couple months ago, and he said I have class on Sunday, so I'm unable to do it. So she was wondering if you knew of someone that is a Jew by choice and has stuck by that decision, and haven't had a whole lot of interest in someone coming forth from that. So I'm not sure who's going to be speaking, but I know that I'm going to be in class. So,
Well, Randy, you and I should talk because maybe I can come up with some ideas.
okay.
If I just
thank
sent
you.
out the whole thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Is the one on veganism, will that be on YouTube or recorded somehow?
Everything that we do, I'm putting on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can watch.
I have a
Yeah.
granddaughter who is a vegan.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, Randy, you and I should talk about that. But I sent out something assuming that you were going to be on it. And then it turns out that you're not. So I lied. No, but it's still going to happen. It's just, we need somebody from the Jewish faith to talk about Jews. So we'll talk. Actually, you want to stay on after everybody goes and we can talk for a second?
Surely.
Okay.
No problem.
All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Have a great day and we'll
Thank
see you
you. Thank
soon.
you.
Okay.
Shalom.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom, everyone.
Toda Rabah. Thank you.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom.